New York City had a certain way of holding people's hearts in its fist, squeezing them with its noise, its relentless pace, and the constant collision of thousands of stories playing out on every street corner. It was a place where people could disappear in plain sight. Where a man in $1,000 suit could walk past a mother sleeping on a subway grate and neither would flinch. But beneath the steel and glass, behind the blaring horns and flashing screens, there were still pockets of tenderness, of quiet humanity, though you had to look closely to see them. Karoline Leavitt had always been one of those people who looked. Even as a little girl growing up in a small town in Vermont, she noticed things others didn't. The old man who sat alone at the diner every morning, scribbling in a worn leather notebook. The classmate who never had a lunch to trade at recess but smiled anyway. She wasn't loud about it, didn't chase attention. She just watched. And sometimes, when it felt right, she did what she could. That instinct never left her. It only grew stronger as she stepped into the jagged world of journalism. She didn't have the flashiest job, wasn't the one hosting primetime slots or chasing after scandal. She told stories about people others overlooked. The single mother starting a backyard garden to feed her neighborhood. The veteran building tiny homes for the homeless with his bare hands. She believed in those stories, in their quiet power. So when her producer pitched the idea of appearing on a popular late-night talk show, she hesitated. "They want you for a segment on political division," her producer, Mallory, had said, waving her phone. "Live debate. You and Robert De Niro." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Robert De Niro? The actor?" "Yeah, but you know how he is. Always making waves on social media, saying stuff about the country falling apart. They want someone to go toe-to-toe with him." Karoline sighed, leaning back in her chair. She wasn't interested in shouting matches. The world had enough of those. But part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to say something that mattered. To remind people what got lost between the insults and headlines. She agreed. In the days leading up to the show, Karoline found herself receiving messages from strangers. Some cheering her on, others warning her not to go. "Don't let that loudmouth steamroll you," one said. "Why bother? Nothing changes," read another. But one letter stood out. It was handwritten, in shaky cursive on lined paper. No return address. "Dear Miss Leavitt. I don't know if you'll see this, but I wanted to thank you. I saw your segment about the community pantry program. My kids and I have been going there. You probably saved our lives. It's not just about the food. It's about knowing someone cares. That we're not invisible. Please don't stop doing what you do. The world needs people like you. Gratefully. Sarah from Iowa." Karoline read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the ink. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her wallet. Not as a good luck charm, but as a reminder of why she said yes. The night of the show arrived. Manhattan was slick with recent rain, and the sky hung low, heavy with clouds. The studio lights were blinding, the makeup artists efficient, the green room humming with nervous energy. Karoline sat quietly, listening to the muffled applause from the stage. De Niro's voice carried through the thin walls, sharp and certain. "Country's going to hell in a handbasket," he was saying. "And it's because people are too soft. Too polite. You gotta call it like you see it." Karoline didn't feel anger listening to him. She felt tired. Tired of the noise, the division, the way people talked at each other instead of to each other. She wasn't here to win an argument. She was here to speak. A stagehand signaled her. "You're up." As she walked toward the stage, the audience's clapping rolled like a wave, mixed with a few scattered boos. She smiled anyway. The host greeted her with a practiced grin, and De Niro barely glanced up as she took her seat. The conversation started predictably. The host made a few jokes to lighten the mood. De Niro rattled off criticisms about the government, about the younger generation, about everything and everyone he disagreed with. The audience hooped and laughed at his sharper jabs. Karoline waited. When it was her turn, she leaned forward slightly, her hands folded loosely in her lap. The camera light blinked red. "Mr. De Niro," she began, and even though the room was noisy, her voice was clear enough to cut through it, "I respect your right to feel frustrated. I get it. A lot of people do. But I think what worries me most about the state of the country isn't just political division. It's that we're forgetting how to see each other. To really see." The audience quieted, uncertain. "I met a boy last week," she continued. 13 years old. He and his mother sleep in their car. He told me the hardest part isn't the cold, or the hunger. It's how people pretend not to see him. How they walk by and look away. You have an enormous platform, Mr. De Niro. And I wonder, instead of stoking anger, what would happen if you used it to shine a light on people like him? For a heartbeat, nothing happened. De Niro's smirk faltered. The audience sat silent. Somewhere, a camera whirred softly. De Niro opened his mouth as if to snap back, but stopped. His face changed, not dramatically, but enough. The sharpness in his eyes dulled. He cleared his throat, glanced down at his hands. "I didn't know," he muttered. Karoline nodded gently. "Most people don't. But that's why we have to tell their stories. Because when we forget the faces behind the numbers, we lose a little bit of ourselves." The moment stretched on, electric and tender. The host shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to cut to commercial. But something held him back. It wasn't a takedown. It wasn't a viral, gotcha, moment. It was something quieter, and perhaps far more dangerous to the anger machine that fed on outrage. The segment ended. The applause was hesitant, thoughtful. As Karoline stood to leave the stage, De Niro caught her arm. "I'd like to hear more about that boy," he said, voice rough. She smiled. "I'll send you his story." What happened next couldn't have been predicted. The clip went viral, not because of confrontation, but because of compassion. People weren't used to it. They shared it, not for the drama, but for the reminder it gave them. Over the next few days, Karoline received an avalanche of letters, emails, messages. A retired teacher in Ohio who started tutoring kids at a shelter. A restaurant owner in Kansas City offering free meals every Sunday to struggling families. An elderly widow who baked loaves of bread for the food pantry in her town. Strangers, moved not by political rhetoric, but by the simple act of seeing. Even De Niro made headlines. A quiet donation to homeless outreach programs. Unannounced visits to shelters. A handwritten letter to that 13-year-old boy, promising he wasn't invisible. For Karoline, it wasn't about headlines. She kept showing up, telling stories of small kindnesses that stacked up like bricks, building something stronger than the noise. Years later, when asked in an interview what she remembered most about that night, she didn't mention the cameras or the viral clip. "It wasn't about getting the last word," she said softly. "It was about watching someone remember what it feels like to care." And sometimes, she thought, that was enough to start saving the world. In the days that followed that unforgettable night, New York felt a little different. Not to everyone, not all at once, but in small, almost imperceptible ways, like the way spring sneaks up on a city long buried in snow. It was in the way people paused a little longer at the crosswalk, helping a stranger gather spilled groceries, or in the way a barista slipped an extra muffin into a paper bag without a word. Kindness, once a rare spark, seemed to flicker to life again, if only in patches. Karoline Leavitt didn't seek out the limelight after that night. She went back to what she knew, finding stories in quiet corners, giving a voice to those no one else bothered to ask about. But it wasn't the same as before. Doors that once stayed closed opened a little easier now. People answered her calls. Strangers approached her on the street, not for selfies, but to share their own small moments of grace. There was one person, though, she didn't expect to hear from again. A week after the show, her phone buzzed late in the evening. She was sitting at her kitchen table, sorting through a stack of letters, when the caller ID flashed a name that made her breath catch. Robert De Niro. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. A pause. Then his gravelly voice, a little softer than she remembered. I know it's late. Hope I'm not bothering you. She smiled despite herself. No bother. Another pause. I wasn't expecting that, he admitted. What you said on the show kind of knocked the wind out of me. Karoline's fingers brushed the letter from Sarah in Iowa. That wasn't my goal. I know, he said quietly. That's why it worked. They talked for nearly an hour. Not about politics, or scandals, or headlines. About people. About a homeless veteran De Niro met outside a deli the day after the show, a man who recognized him and told him his favorite film. About the boy in the car, who Karoline promised to send a care package to. About how easy it was, in their respective worlds, to forget the ones who couldn't shout loud enough to be heard. De Niro surprised her with a question before they hung up. You think it's too late? For someone like me to matter, to do something good? She didn't hesitate. It's never too late to be decent. It wasn't some grand declaration. Just a quiet truth. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it felt like one of the most important things she'd ever said. In the weeks that followed, De Niro kept his word. Not for the cameras. Not for headlines. Quiet things. Donations to shelters. Anonymous pickups of hotel room bills for homeless families. Notes left for people who needed them. One night, Karoline received a message from a shelter director in the Bronx. Some big-shot actor just came through. No entourage. Sat with the residents for hours. Made them laugh. Told stories. Promised to come back. She smiled, knowing. The ripple spread wider. Karoline's foundation, the Seen and Heard Project, exploded with support. Not just from celebrities or corporations, but from regular people. A librarian in Missouri who turned the back room of her tiny library into a free tutoring space for kids after school. A cab driver in Chicago who stocked a cooler in his trunk with bottled water and granola bars for the homeless he passed. A retired carpenter in Florida who started building benches for bus stops so no one had to stand while waiting for a ride. The media tried to turn it into a trend, gave it a hashtag, tried to label it. But Karoline knew it was simpler than that. It was the human heart remembering what it was made for. One afternoon, months later, she found herself standing in front of a small, aging community center in a forgotten neighborhood on the city's outskirts. It was a gray day, clouds heavy like unspilled tears. She was there to meet someone. The boy. His name was Marcus. She'd spoken to his mother on the phone. Arranged to meet them, no cameras, no press. Just two people. Three, if you counted Marcus's mother, who stood off to the side now, watching with wary, exhausted eyes. Marcus was smaller than she expected. Thin, with a too big hoodie swallowing his frame, but his eyes were sharp, alive. He didn't smile much. Karoline knelt to meet him at eye level. You remember me? He shrugged. You talked about me on TV. I did, she said gently. I wanted people to know you mattered. He stared at her, like trying to figure out if it was a trick. I got stuff after that, he mumbled. People left food. Blankets. Even a tablet thing. She smiled. Good. You deserve good things. Another shrug, but a flicker of something softened his face. You know, she continued, a lot of people don't see what's in front of them. Not because they're bad. They just forget to look. But you, Marcus, you've made them remember. That's not a small thing. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Karoline reached into her bag and pulled out a worn, dog-eared book. The Call of the Wild. She handed it to him. It was my favorite when I was your age. Thought you might like it. He took it, almost reverently, turning it over in his hands. Thanks. They sat there on the cold steps for a while, saying nothing. It wasn't awkward. Just quiet. The good kind of quiet. Later, as Karoline drove away, she realized she hadn't felt that kind of peace in a long time. The year rolled on. The world remained messy. Arguments still raged on television. Headlines still screamed. But here and there, things shifted. Niro started a scholarship fund for children in shelters, naming it after his late mother. Karoline's foundation opened its third free community library, packed with donated books. Marcus and his mother moved into a small apartment through a housing program funded by anonymous donations. And perhaps the most remarkable part, people kept reaching out. A nurse in Nebraska who set up a coat drive for the coming winter. A teenager in Philadelphia organizing a cleanup of abandoned lots. A man in Seattle who gave his shoes to a stranger in need and walked the rest of the way home barefoot. It wasn't about politics anymore. It wasn't about going viral. It was about people remembering what it felt like to care. One evening, a letter arrived at Karoline's office. No return address. Inside was a simple note, written in a careful, childlike scrawl. Dear Miss Leavitt. I finished the book. It was good. I liked the dog. Thanks for seeing me. Your friend. Marcus. She held the note to her heart, tears pricking her eyes. It wasn't the biggest story she'd ever told. It wouldn't make the front page. But it mattered. It mattered in ways no camera could capture. And years from now, when someone asked what started it all, how a country as angry and divided as theirs had begun to stitch itself back together, people would point to different things. A speech, a protest, a law. But Karoline would remember a night in a studio, a boy in a car, and 1,000 small kindnesses that spread like light in the dark. Because sometimes, you didn't need to change the whole world. Sometimes, you just had to change one heart. And if enough people did that, the world would take care of itself.